You wake in the morning and something feels wrong before you even open your eyes. There's a weight pressing against your chest, not physical, but deeper, more ancient. You rise and move through your day and you see things, small things, the way someone's smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, the tension hiding beneath polite conversation, the unspoken resentments hanging in the air like smoke. You notice the contradiction between what people say and what they truly feel. You sense the fear behind confidence, the desperation beneath success, the loneliness wrapped in crowds, and you think nothing of it at first because this is how you've always been. This is simply how you experience the world. But then something shifts. You begin to realize that others don't see what you see. They move through life with a kind of blindness that seems almost peaceful. They accept the surface. They believe the masks. They live in a world of agreed upon illusions, and they seem happy there. And when you try to share what you perceive, when you gently point out the obvious patterns, the hidden motivations, the unacknowledged truths, something strange happens. People pull away. They grow uncomfortable. They accuse you of being negative, of seeing problems where none exist, of ruining the mood. They tell you that you think too much, that you're too sensitive, that you're making things complicated. And slowly, quietly, without anyone saying it directly, you find yourself alone, not because you chose isolation, but because your very presence makes others uneasy. Your clarity threatens their comfort. Your honesty disrupts their carefully constructed illusions. You become dangerous simply by seeing what you see, and you wonder if there's something terribly wrong with you, if perhaps it would be better to be blind like everyone else. If seeing too much is a curse disguised as a gift, let me tell you something that Dostoevsky understood with brutal clarity. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not the problem. What you're experiencing is not a malfunction of your mind, but evidence of its depth. The isolation you feel is not punishment for seeing clearly. It is the inevitable consequence of consciousness in an unconscious world. Dostoevsky knew this because he lived it. He spent years among criminals and outcasts, observing human nature at its most raw and honest. He saw through the polite facades of society to the writhing darkness beneath. He understood that most people spend their entire lives running from truth, constructing elaborate defenses against self-knowledge, and anyone who refuses to participate in that collective delusion becomes a threat. The people who push you away are not rejecting you. They are protecting themselves from what you represent. Your vision holds up a mirror they cannot bear to look into. Your honesty asks questions they have spent years avoiding. Your mere existence reminds them of all the truths they've buried beneath layers of distraction and denial. So they label you as difficult, as negative, as too much. They make you feel as though your gift is a burden. But understand this clearly. The discomfort they feel around you is not your fault. It is their fear meeting your light. Dostoevsky discovered something profound in his years of suffering and observation. What society calls dangerous is often simply what is true. In his masterwork, Crime and Castigo, he gave us Raskolnikov, a young man cursed with a mind too penetrating for his own comfort. Raskolnikov could not simply live. He had to understand. He had to question. He had to see through the moral pretenses of his society to the raw mechanisms of power and weakness beneath. And this seeing nearly destroyed him, not because he was evil, but because consciousness itself, when taken to its furthest edge, becomes a form of torture. Dostoevsky understood that there are people born into this world with a different quality of attention. They cannot help but perceive the hidden architecture of human interaction. They see the puppets and the strings. They recognize the scripts everyone is unconsciously following. They feel the weight of unspoken truths in every room they enter, and this perception separates them from the majority of humanity who live in a kind of blessed ignorance. In his Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky wrote about a man so conscious, so aware, that he became paralyzed by his own insight. The underground man sees everything. He understands the mechanisms of human behavior with devastating clarity. He recognizes the lies people tell themselves, the ways they justify their actions, the elaborate fictions they construct to avoid facing themselves. And this knowledge makes him miserable, because once you truly see, you cannot unsee. Once you understand the game, you can no longer play it with innocent enthusiasm. What you call seeing too much, Dostoevsky would call the burden of consciousness. And he knew that this burden always leads to the same place: isolation, not because you choose it, but because the unconscious world cannot tolerate being seen. Truth is dangerous, not because it harms, but because it reveals. And most people would rather preserve their illusions than face what lies beneath them. Now let me show you what Dostoevsky observed about people like you, those cursed and blessed with this dangerous clarity of vision. There are layers to this isolation, depths that most never articulate, but that Dostoevsky mapped with surgical precision. The first dimension of your dangerous seeing is that you perceive inconsistency where others see coherence. You watch someone speak with passion about honesty while lying about their deepest feelings. You observe people preaching kindness while harboring bitter resentments. You notice the gap between stated values and actual behavior. And this gap, which seems glaringly obvious to you, is invisible to most. They take people at their word. They accept the performance as reality. But you cannot. Your mind automatically calculates the distance between what is said and what is true, between the mask and the face beneath it. And when you point this out, even gently, people react with hostility because you're asking them to see something they've worked very hard not to see. Dostoevsky showed us this repeatedly in his characters. Think of Ivan Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, a man whose intellect could dissect any belief system, any moral claim, exposing the contradictions others preferred to ignore. Ivan's clarity made him unbearable to those around him, not because he was cruel, but because he refused to pretend. He would not participate in the comfortable lies that held society together, and this refusal made him dangerous. Dostoevsky wrote that Ivan's suffering came not from his ideas themselves, but from living in a world that could not tolerate his level of honesty. The second dimension is even more isolating. You don't just see the inconsistencies in others. You see the machinery of social interaction itself. You recognize that most human communication is ritualistic performance rather than genuine exchange. Small talk, pleasantries, the careful dance of saying what's expected rather than what's true. These rituals serve a function. They maintain social cohesion. They allow people to coexist without the friction of authentic encounter. but you cannot fully participate in them because you see through them. When someone asks how you are, you feel the weight of the real answer pressing against the expected lie of fine, good, can't complain. When conversations float on the surface of safe topics, you sense the depths churning beneath, all the things no one dares to say, and you face a terrible choice. Either participate in the performance, which feels like betraying yourself, or speak honestly, which disrupts the social order and marks you as difficult, as inappropriate, as someone who doesn't know how to behave. Dostoevsky explored this mercilessly in Notes from Underground. The underground man attends a dinner party and cannot simply engage in pleasant conversation. He sees too much. He understands the status games, the subtle manipulations, the ways everyone is performing for everyone else, and his awareness makes him unable to play along. He becomes the disruptive presence, the one who makes everyone uncomfortable, not through malice, but through his inability to pretend. He's too conscious to be unconscious, too aware to participate in the shared delusion that passes for normalcy. The third dimension of your dangerous seeing cuts even deeper. You perceive suffering that others have learned to ignore. You feel the quiet desperation behind polished exteriors. You sense the grief people carry in silence. You recognize the fear hiding beneath anger, the pain masked by achievement, the emptiness that success fails to fill. You walk through the world and you feel the weight of collective pain that most have become numb to. And this sensitivity is not weakness. It's a different calibration of consciousness, but it exhausts you because you're processing emotional information that others filter out. You cannot walk into a room without sensing the atmosphere, reading the subtle tensions, feeling the unspoken dynamics. And when you respond to what you perceive, when you offer comfort to someone who hasn't acknowledged their pain, or when you pull away from situations that feel energetically toxic, people don't understand. They think you're overreacting, being dramatic, making things up. They cannot see what you see because they've trained themselves not to see it. Dostoevsky understood this intimately. In The Idiot, he gave us Prince Mishkin, a man of such profound sensitivity and empathy that society could not contain him. Mishkin saw the suffering in everyone. He responded to the hidden pain beneath people's defenses, and this made him seem naive, simple, even foolish to those around him. But Dostoevsky's genius was showing us that Mishkin's apparent foolishness was actually a higher form of wisdom. He saw what others couldn't see, and he responded with love rather than judgment, and the world called him an idiot for it. The world always calls dangerous seers by diminishing names, because to acknowledge their vision would require acknowledging what they see. Here's where it becomes truly dangerous. The fourth dimension is that you see the future consequences of present actions. You recognize patterns that others dismiss as coincidence. You sense when a relationship is heading toward betrayal before the betrayal occurs. You feel when a path leads to destruction before the destruction becomes obvious. You perceive the slow accumulation of small compromises that will eventually collapse into crisis. And you try to warn people. You try to share what you see, but they don't want to hear it. They call you negative, pessimistic, a prophet of doom. They accuse you of creating problems that don't exist. And then, months or years later, exactly what you perceived unfolds. The relationship ends in the way you predicted. The situation collapses as you warned it would. And do people come to you and say you were right? Rarely. More often, they avoid you because your accuracy is frightening. It means that if you were right about that, you might be right about other things they're not ready to face. You become dangerous, not just because you see, but because what you see tends to be true. Dostoevsky showed us this in The Demons, where the character Shatov sees the destructive trajectory of the revolutionary movement before it becomes obvious to others. He perceives that the grand ideas will lead to bloodshed and chaos. He tries to warn. He tries to step away. But his clarity makes him a target because he represents the conscience that the movement has to silence in order to proceed. Truth-tellers are always dangerous to those invested in delusion, and societies, movements, relationships built on lies will always seek to eliminate or exile those who refuse to participate in the lie. The fifth, and perhaps most devastating dimension, is this. You see not only the darkness in others, but the darkness in yourself. While most people maintain a carefully curated image of who they are, you cannot hide from your own contradictions. You notice when you're being hypocritical. You recognize your own defenses. You see the ways you manipulate, avoid, pretend. And this self-knowledge is both liberating and torturous. You cannot grant yourself the mercy of ignorance that others enjoy. You cannot lie to yourself as convincingly as those around you lie to themselves. Dostoevsky understood that this is perhaps the heaviest burden of consciousness. In Crime and Castigo, Raskolnikov's greatest agony is not external punishment, but his inability to escape his own knowing. He sees what he has done. He sees what he is. He cannot convince himself of the noble lies that might justify his actions. His consciousness becomes his prison. And Dostoevsky shows us that true transformation only begins when we stop trying to escape what we see in ourselves. When we face the underground of our own hearts with the same clarity we bring to seeing others. This is why people like you are dangerous. You threaten the collective agreement to ignore certain truths. You disrupt the social contract that says, we will all pretend together. You cannot participate in the comfortable fictions that allow society to function smoothly. And your very existence asks everyone around you a question they don't want to answer. What if I stopped pretending too? What if I acknowledged what I actually see and feel and know? Your clarity is contagious, and that makes you dangerous. So what do you do with this dangerous gift? What did Dostoevsky, who lived this burden himself, offer as a path through the isolation? He did not offer easy answers. He did not suggest that you blind yourself or learn to play along. Instead, he pointed towards something more difficult and more profound: acceptance. Not acceptance of the world's blindness, but acceptance of your own nature. Dostoevsky believed that conscious suffering, when embraced rather than resisted, becomes the doorway to transformation. In all his works, his characters who achieve any form of peace are those who stop fighting against what they see. They stop trying to be understood by those who cannot understand. They stop seeking validation from a world that fears their vision. Instead, they turn inward and they ask a different question. Not, how do I make others see what I see? But how do I live honestly with this sight? Raskolnikov finds redemption not when others recognize his genius, but when he accepts the full weight of his consciousness and kneels in the dust of his own humanity. Ivan Karamazov finds peace not through intellectual victory, but through the breakdown of his certainties and the emergence of something more essential: love in the face of absurdity. The underground man never fully escapes his torment, but Dostoevsky suggests that his very articulation of it, his refusal to lie about his condition, is itself a form of integrity that others lack. The path Dostoevsky offers is not about changing yourself. It's about understanding that your isolation is the price of refusing to participate in unconsciousness. And that price, painful as it is also your dignity. He would tell you to seek not the many who cannot see, but the few who can, to stop trying to make yourself understandable to those committed to misunderstanding, to recognize that loneliness in truth is preferable to connection built on lies. He would tell you to write, to create, to articulate what you see not for validation, but for its own sake. Dostoevsky poured his dangerous seeing into his novels. He took the isolation of consciousness and transformed it into art that would outlive him by centuries. He didn't need the people of his time to understand him. He spoke to the eternal human condition, and in doing so, he found companionship across time with others who see as deeply as he did. You must find your own form of this, your own way of honoring what you see without requiring the world to validate it, whether through writing, art, quiet witness, or simply the daily practice of not lying to yourself. Dostoevsky would also tell you to embrace suffering consciously. He believed that avoiding pain causes more pain than facing it directly. The isolation you feel is painful. The misunderstanding is painful. The sense of being dangerous simply for being honest is painful. But trying to numb that pain, trying to force yourself to be blind, trying to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that cannot hold your fullness, these strategies create a deeper anguish, the suffering of betraying yourself. Instead, feel the isolation fully. Let it teach you. Let it show you what matters and what doesn't. Let it refine your understanding of connection. Because once you accept that you will never be understood by the many, you become free to seek the few who matter, the ones who are not threatened by your sight, the ones who meet your honesty with their own. These connections, rare as they are, will be real in ways that superficial connection never could be. Dostoevsky found these few in his life and in his work. He corresponded with readers who understood him across distances. He built relationships with fellow sufferers who shared his burden of consciousness. He learned that isolation is not the same as aloneness. You can be surrounded by people and feel utterly alone. You can be physically isolated and feel profoundly connected to truth, to beauty, to the eternal questions that matter. This is the paradox he lived and wrote about. The path is to stop seeking approval from those who cannot see what you see, to stop explaining yourself to those invested in not understanding, to stop shrinking your perception to make others comfortable. Instead, speak your truth and let the world sort itself around you. Some will flee, let them. Some will attack, let them reveal themselves. And some, the precious few, will recognize you and will say without words, "I see it too. I've been waiting for someone else who sees." Your dangerous seeing is not a curse to overcome. It's a calling to live differently. Dostoevsky would tell you that you were not meant for the shallow waters where most people swim contentedly. You were built for depths that terrify those who prefer the surface. And yes, those depths are lonely, Yes, they are cold. Yes, they will separate you from the comfortable unconsciousness that makes ordinary life seem easy. But they are also real in ways that the surface never could be. They are honest in ways that polite lies never are. They are alive in ways that numb existence never achieves. You are dangerous because danger is what we call anything that threatens the status quo. And you threaten the agreement to remain asleep. You threaten the collective decision to ignore what's uncomfortable. You threaten the carefully maintained illusions that allow people to avoid facing themselves. This is your power and your burden. Dostoevsky carried it, and it did not make his life easy. He was imprisoned, exiled, misunderstood, and often desperately poor. But he never stopped seeing. He never dimmed his vision to gain approval. He transformed his suffering into truth, and his truth into art that still shakes people awake more than a century after his death. You stand in that lineage now, whether you know it or not. The lineage of those who refuse to pretend, who see what others cannot or will not see, who pay the price of consciousness and somehow find it worthwhile, not because it brings comfort, but because it brings something more valuable than comfort. It brings authenticity, it brings depth, it brings the possibility of real connection with the few who matter, and it brings you face to face with yourself, stripped of the comfortable lies that let others sleep peacefully. This is your inheritance. This is your responsibility. And this is, ultimately, your gift to a world that needs people who see even when it punishes them for seeing. So when the world pulls away from you, when people grow uncomfortable in your presence, when you feel the isolation pressing in around you, remember what Dostoevsky knew. This is not rejection of you, but of what you represent, the mirror you hold up, the questions you ask by existing, the truths you embody by refusing to pretend. Your dangerous seeing is proof that you are awake in a sleeping world, and the sleeping world will always fear those who refuse to dream its dreams. But you were not meant to sleep. You were not meant to pretend. You were not meant to dim your light so others feel less exposed by it. You were meant to see clearly and to live according to that sight, even when it costs you comfort, approval, belonging. This is not a path for the many. It is a path for the few who cannot choose otherwise. And if you find yourself on this path, not by choice but by nature, then walk it with the dignity of someone who knows their own worth, is not determined by who understands them. Dostoevsky died believing that truth would ultimately prevail, that the lies we tell ourselves cannot hold forever, that consciousness, painful as it is, represents humanity's deepest hope. He saw the worst of human nature in the prison camps of Siberia. He lived through poverty, illness, loss. He endured mockery and misunderstanding, but he never regretted seeing what he saw. He never wished for the blindness that makes life easier, because he understood something that the comfortable never understand, that a life lived in truth, however difficult, is infinitely more real than a life lived in comfortable delusion. You are not too much. You do not see too much. You are not dangerous in any way that should make you ashamed. You are simply awake, and the awakened will always seem dangerous to those who prefer to sleep. Let them sleep. Let them pull away. Let them call you negative, difficult, too intense, and find your people among the other wakeful ones, the other dangerous seers, the other ones who cannot help but see. Together, In your small and sacred fellowship, you will find something the sleeping world never knows: real connection, real understanding, real presence with what is, rather than what we pretend. This is what Dostoevsky offers you: not comfort, but truth; not ease, but meaning; not belonging, but integrity. And in the end, after all the isolation and all the misunderstanding, you will know that you lived honestly, and that is worth more than all the comfortable lies in the world. If any part of this spoke to your experience, if you recognized yourself in these words, leave a comment sharing which aspect of dangerous seeing resonates most deeply with you. Your story might help another person realize they are not alone in this strange and difficult gift. And if you want to continue exploring these depths, these uncomfortable truths about consciousness and isolation that Dostoevsky understood so well, subscribe for more reflections on the price and power of seeing clearly in an unconscious world. I also invite you to watch my video on how Dostoevsky understood the suffering that transforms rather than destroys, where we explore how conscious pain becomes the doorway to authentic life. Thank you for your presence here, for your willingness to face these difficult truths, and for your courage in continuing to see even when the world asks you to go blind. You are not alone in this darkness. You are among those who chose light even when it burns.